It's strange how quickly love can twist into something else, something you never saw coming. When I first met Clara, she was the kind of woman who could make any man feel small and lucky at the same time. Confident, elegant, with that commanding tone that made you want to please her. I used to admire it. Maybe that's what drew me in. I didn't realize how deeply that admiration would turn into something that would change not only our relationship but who I was as a person. It started simple. We had been together for 2 years. I was comfortable, too comfortable, she would say. I had a decent job, we shared an apartment, and I thought things were good. But she often said I lacked initiative, that I drifted too much, that I didn't know what I wanted. I used to laugh it off. But one day, she didn't laugh. She just looked at me, quiet, calculating, and asked, "Do you trust me?" I nodded, like I always did. That's when everything started. She said she had a game in mind. Something that would teach me perspective, discipline, and humility. I thought she meant a couple's challenge or something romantic. But what she said next caught me off guard. For 1 week, she said, "You're going to serve me. Not as my boyfriend, but as my maid." I remember laughing, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't. Her eyes stayed cold and steady. "You'll wear what I give you, do what I say, and learn what it means to truly care for someone beyond yourself." I hesitated. It sounded humiliating, but she said it with such conviction that I felt cornered. I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to lose her. So I agreed. The next morning, she laid out an outfit on the bed. A black dress. A white apron. A pair of stockings. My first instinct was to protest, but the way she folded her arms told me that backing out wasn't an option anymore. She called it commitment training. My throat went dry as I picked up the clothes. The fabric was smooth, light, foreign to my touch. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with a quiet satisfaction. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Let's see if you can handle obedience." I can still remember the sound of the zipper going up my back. The way the dress hugged me awkwardly, the way the stockings felt against my skin. I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. My heart pounded. I wasn't just playing a part. I was stepping into something that felt strangely irreversible. Clara smiled, walking around me slowly, like an artist inspecting her work. "Perfect," she whispered. "Now, you'll serve breakfast." The first few days were a blur of confusion. She gave me tasks, cleaning, ironing, preparing meals, always addressing me as her maid. It was supposed to be a lesson in humility, but somewhere between the sweeping and the silent obedience, I started feeling something else, something I didn't expect. There was peace in it. A strange calm. I wasn't arguing, proving, or pretending. I was just existing, quietly, usefully, seen in a different way. Still, there were moments when I caught myself wondering if she was taking it too far. She had me answer the door dressed that way one evening when a package arrived. The delivery man's expression froze, then softened with awkward politeness. My face burned, but Clara's proud smirk behind me stopped me from saying anything. After he left, she laughed softly. "You did well," she said, and for some reason, her approval made my embarrassment worth it. By the 4th day, something shifted. Clara stopped calling me by my name. She called me Lena. She said it suited me better. I didn't argue. Every night, I thought about asking her when this would end, but each time I tried, she would silence me with a look. "You said 1 week," I'd whisper. She'd nod and say, "We'll see if you've learned by then." That phrase haunted me. Learned what? That I could follow orders. That love could turn into control. But I also couldn't deny that I was seeing her differently. There was a quiet tenderness beneath her commands, a kind of intimacy that didn't come from touch or words. When she corrected how I folded a towel, she stood close enough for me to feel her breath. When she praised me for setting the table perfectly, her voice softened, and I caught glimpses of warmth again, the woman I fell in love with. One night, she asked me to sit. I stood in the kitchen, still dressed as her maid, holding a glass of water. She looked tired, thoughtful. "Do you know why I made you do this?" she asked. I hesitated. I didn't. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Because I was losing you. You stopped trying. You stopped seeing me. I wanted to show you what it feels like to put someone else before yourself, to serve love, not just claim it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had taken her for granted. But the way she went about teaching me that lesson, it was painful, humbling, but it also broke something open inside me. I realized I'd been living behind pride and comfort, mistaking laziness for contentment. When the week ended, I expected her to say it was over. I expected to change back, to return to normal. But she didn't. She said quietly, "You don't have to stop. You can choose." I looked at her, confused, waiting for her to laugh or push me toward the closet. But she didn't move. "You're free," she said. "If this isn't who you are, you can walk away. But if you found something in it, then stay." I should have taken off the dress. I should have reclaimed my name, my role, my place as her partner. But I didn't. Something in me resisted the return to who I was before. It wasn't about submission anymore, it was about understanding. I felt seen, not as the man trying to impress her, but as the person she always wanted me to become, attentive, aware, unafraid to feel small sometimes. Over time, the game faded, but the roles didn't. Not completely. Clara started introducing me to her friends again, not as her boyfriend, but simply as Lena. It shocked me the first time. I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. And the strangest part was I didn't correct her. Her friends smiled, curious but polite. They didn't laugh or question it. And I realized the world didn't end just because someone saw me differently. I started helping Clara more with her work, taking care of details she used to handle alone. I dressed differently, spoke softer, and felt something quietly bloom in me that I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She never forced me again, she didn't have to. I began choosing it on my own. Some days I still wore the uniform. It wasn't about humiliation anymore, it was a reminder. A reminder of how love isn't always about equality in the way we expect, but about balance, care, and transformation. Of course, there were days when doubt crept in. I'd catch my reflection and think, what happened to me? But then I'd see Clara walk in, her face softening when she saw me, and I'd know that what we had became something deeper than the roles we started with. It was like we had rewritten what love meant for us. One evening, months later, she asked me to sit beside her. She held my hand gently, tracing her thumb over my knuckles. "You know," she said, "when I first asked you to do this, I didn't expect it to change us both." I looked at her, unsure of what to say. She smiled faintly. "You found yourself, didn't you? Maybe not in the way you expected, but you did." I didn't have to answer. She already knew. Because it was true. Somewhere between the lessons and the quiet obedience, I'd shed parts of myself I didn't need anymore: the ego, the fear of being seen differently, the constant need to prove I was the one in control. I had learned to listen, to serve, to care, not because I was told to, but because I wanted to. People often talk about transformation like it's a sudden, magical change. But in truth, it's slow. It sneaks up on you, through moments you think don't matter. Folding a towel right. Listening instead of talking. Learning humility. Letting go of how the world expects you to act. I never thought I'd find freedom in something that began as a command. But I did. Sometimes Clara still teases me about that first week. She'll walk by and say, "Remember when you couldn't even tie the apron properly?" And we'll both laugh. But there's always that look in her eyes: pride, affection, maybe even awe. She doesn't see a joke anymore. She sees someone who stayed, someone who learned. Now, I don't know if I'm her maid or her lover, or maybe both. The labels don't matter as much as they used to. What matters is the truth that came out of all this. That love can reshape you in ways you never imagined, that sometimes you have to lose who you thought you were to find who you were meant to be. And if someone asked me now whether I regret it, the days of quiet servitude, the embarrassment, the confusion, I would say no. Because in that strange experiment, I found a mirror I'd never looked into before. I saw a softer version of myself, one who could love without pride, serve without shame, and exist without fear of judgment. Clara once said, "Love isn't about who leads or follows. It's about who's willing to change for the other." And maybe that's what this story really is: not about dominance or submission, but transformation. From lover to maid, from pride to understanding, from the person I was to the person I became. Sometimes at night, when I prepare tea for her and she thanks me with that quiet smile, I realize that the line between love and service isn't as rigid as people think. Because when you truly love someone, you serve them in 100 invisible ways every day through patience, care, and the courage to change. And maybe, just maybe, being her maid wasn't a punishment or a game. Maybe it was destiny's strange way of teaching me who I was always meant to be. I thought that was the end of it, the lesson, the transformation, the quiet understanding between us. But life has a strange way of testing whether you've truly learned what you think you have. 4 months after that first week, everything between Clara and me felt balanced, softer. We moved through our days like two people who had been stripped of illusions and rebuilt something more genuine. But then one morning, she asked me a question that unsettled everything again. "Lena," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "would you do this for someone else?" The question hit me hard. I didn't know what she meant at first. "Do what?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Serve. Help. Care for someone else the way you've learned to care for me." I hesitated. I'd grown so used to her world, her structure, her quiet dominance that I hadn't thought about how it would feel outside of it. Clara leaned back, crossing her arms. "You've grown," she said softly, "but only within the safety of us. What happens when that's tested?" That's when she told me about her friend, Evelyn. She was recovering from surgery and needed help around her place. Clara said she'd offered my assistance not as her partner, but as her maid. The words sank like stones. I didn't know what to say. It felt like being pushed back into the deep end after learning to swim in still water. "You trust me, don't you?" Clara said again, the same way she had at the beginning. So I agreed. Partly because I didn't want to disappoint her, and partly because a quiet voice inside me wanted to know if what I'd learned was real or just something that existed between us. When I arrived at Evelyn's house that first day, she greeted me warmly, but with curious eyes. "Clara said you'd come help out," she said. "You must be Lena." Hearing it from someone else made my heart skip. I wanted to correct her, say my real name, but the words caught in my throat. I just nodded and followed her inside. Evelyn was kind but demanding in her own way. Her place was filled with books, soft colors, and the faint smell of lavender. She moved slowly, still recovering, and often asked me to assist with small tasks: laundry, meals, tidying up. At first, it felt mechanical, but soon, I noticed something deeper happening. I began to feel comfortable again, purposeful. I wasn't pretending anymore. Each day, I felt less like an imposter and more like someone living a quiet truth. But not everyone understood. One afternoon, while I was running errands for Evelyn, I ran into an old friend from my previous life, Mark. We used to work together. He recognized me instantly, though it took him a moment to process what he was seeing. "Wait, is that you?" he asked, eyes darting from the simple skirt I was wearing to the shopping bag in my hand. My stomach twisted. I tried to explain, to tell him it wasn't what it looked like, but my words stumbled. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "Man, what happened to you?" he said quietly, before walking away. That night, I sat in Evelyn's living room long after she'd gone to bed, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't know who I was anymore. Was I still the man who fell in love with Clara? Or was I something else entirely, now someone who existed between the spaces of identity and expectation? When I told Clara what had happened, she didn't look surprised. "People fear what they don't understand," she said. "But you're not here to make them comfortable. You're here to become free." Free. That word echoed in me for days. For so long, I had equated freedom with control, with being strong, assertive, certain. But maybe freedom was the opposite. Maybe it was the courage to be misunderstood, to live truthfully even when the world tilted its head and said, "Why?" As weeks passed, Evelyn started noticing how carefully I moved, how I paid attention to every detail. One evening she smiled and said, "You remind me of someone who's finally found peace." That caught me off guard. Peace wasn't something I thought I'd found. But maybe she was right. There was a calmness to my days now, a rhythm that felt natural. When my time helping Evelyn came to an end, she hugged me gently and said, "Clara was right about you. You don't just help people, you heal them by being kind." Those words stayed with me. When I returned home, Clara welcomed me with a soft smile, her eyes proud. "Well," she asked, "did you learn?" I nodded. "I think I learned what you wanted me to see, that it's not about who serves who. It's about what kind of heart you bring to it." Clara looked at me for a long moment before whispering, "Exactly." Then she said something I didn't expect. "Lena, would you like to make it permanent?" I froze. "Permanent?" She nodded. "Not as an obligation. As a life you choose. You've been living between worlds, mine, Evelyn's, your past. Maybe it's time you choose the one that feels real." I didn't answer right away. That night, I lay awake thinking about it. The choice wasn't about clothes or titles or roles anymore. It was about identity, who I was when I stopped pretending for anyone. Somewhere along the way, I had discovered that service, care, and grace didn't make me less of a person. They made me more. I had changed, yes, but maybe I had just uncovered what was always there beneath the noise of expectation. The next morning, I told Clara my decision. I said I didn't want to go back to the life I had before. I wanted to continue as I was, not as her experiment, but as myself. She smiled softly, no longer the strict, commanding figure who had started this journey, but a woman who looked at me as her equal, her mirror. "Then you're free," she said simply. After that, everything shifted quietly. I found work assisting an elderly neighbor, then another family. Word spread, and soon, I was helping several people, living each day with the same sense of purpose Clara had awakened in me. I wasn't ashamed anymore. I was fulfilled. People might not have understood my path, but I did. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Clara and I remained together, though our relationship had transformed too. She no longer needed to test me or guide me. I had grown into something she could simply love without shaping. Sometimes she still teased me by calling me Lena, my little maid, but it wasn't a title anymore, it was a symbol of everything we'd been through. Years later, I looked back on that moment, the day she first said, "You'll serve me." I realized it was never about power or control. It was about love teaching me through humility. The uniform, the name, the service, all of it had been tools to strip away who I pretended to be so I could find who I really was. Now, when I see my reflection, I don't see confusion. I see peace. A person who learned that transformation isn't something that happens to you, it's something you allow to happen through you. And when people ask how it all began, I smile and say, it started with love. But it became something much deeper, a journey from lover to maid, and finally, to myself. I used to think stories like mine ended when understanding was reached, when love softened and everything found balance. But the truth is, transformation doesn't stop when you find peace, it deepens, stretches, and tests itself against the world again and again. Even after everything that had happened between Clara and me, life wasn't content to leave things untouched. It kept moving, and with it came choices that would redefine what my new identity truly meant. Months after I began working independently, my quiet world began to change. One of the families I helped recommended me to a small boutique hotel looking for someone discreet, polished, and reliable. Clara encouraged me to take the job, saying it would be good for me to step into a public space again, to see how my transformation would hold under the eyes of strangers. I was hesitant, but something in her voice made me feel ready. The interview was short, professional, but filled with silent curiosity. The manager, a gentle woman named Serena, studied me carefully. She asked about my background, my attention to detail, my comfort with formal service. I answered honestly, though part of me trembled. At the end, she said, "You carry yourself with calm. That's rare. I think you'll fit in here." And just like that, I found myself wearing a new uniform, crisp white blouse, black skirt, a name tag that read Lena. The first time I pinned it on, I paused. It wasn't pretend anymore. I wasn't doing it for Clara or anyone's lesson. This was my reality. My hands trembled slightly, but when I looked at my reflection, I saw someone who belonged. Working there taught me more than I expected. People came and went, travelers, families, business guests, and in the quiet rhythm of daily routines, I found comfort. Cleaning rooms, arranging flowers, serving tea. It wasn't about subservience. It was about presence, about turning small moments into acts of quiet care. But even in that peace, the world has a way of challenging who you've become. One morning, as I was polishing silver in the dining hall, I heard a familiar voice. I froze before even turning around. It was my mother's. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She was sitting with a friend, visiting the city for a conference. When she looked up and saw me, time seemed to stop. Our eyes met, and I felt the air leave my lungs. She didn't recognize me at first. Then realization dawned, and her face shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to something I couldn't name. "Is that you?" she whispered as I approached. My throat went dry. "Yes, Mom. It's me." Her friend excused herself quietly, sensing the weight between us. My mother's hands trembled as she gestured for me to sit. "Why?" she finally asked, voice breaking. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" I tried to explain, to tell her it wasn't punishment or confusion, but something that brought me peace. But she couldn't see it that way. "You were such a strong boy," she said softly, tears forming. "What happened to you?" Those words stung more than I wanted to admit. I sat there, in that polished dining hall, in the uniform that had come to define me, feeling like the air had been knocked out of me. But then something inside me steadied. I realized I didn't owe the world an apology for who I had become. I looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe I was never meant to be the strong boy you wanted. Maybe I was meant to be someone gentler. Someone who serves, not out of weakness, but love." She didn't reply. She just looked at me, lost in her own memories. We parted that day with heavy hearts. For weeks afterward, her face haunted me. I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd lost too much of what made me recognizable to those I loved. Clara noticed my quietness. One night, she asked, "Are you ashamed?" I shook my head slowly. "No. Just afraid I'll lose everyone who can't understand." She took my hands and said something I'll never forget. "Lena, you can't lose people by being yourself. You can only discover who was never meant to stay." That night I cried for a long time, not because I regretted anything, but because I realized how much courage it takes to live truthfully when the world wants you to fit its shape. I went back to work the next morning with renewed quiet strength. I smiled more, moved with intention, and for the first time, didn't flinch when someone used my name. Weeks later, I received a letter. It was from my mother. The handwriting trembled, but the words were softer. She wrote, "I may not understand, but I can see in your eyes that you've found peace. Maybe that's all a parent can hope for." That letter became a quiet turning point. It was as if life had finally accepted the version of me I had become. Clara framed the letter and placed it on our bedside table. "See," she said gently. "Even the hardest hearts learn to see love eventually." As the seasons passed, I rose in the hotel ranks. They promoted me to a supervisory role, trusting me with training new staff. I found myself guiding others with the same patience Clara once showed me, teaching, encouraging, helping them find pride in service. It was a strange circle, how what began as an act of submission became leadership through empathy. Then one evening, the hotel hosted a charity event. Clara attended, radiant in a silver gown. She hadn't seen me in uniform at work before. When she watched me moving through the crowd, managing details, assisting guests, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Afterward, she told me, "You're not my maid anymore, Lena. You're my equal. You've mastered what I only wanted you to learn, to live with grace no matter who's watching." Her words marked the true end of the journey that had begun so long ago with that strange command. I realized the lesson was never about power or control, but self-discovery. What started as from lover to her maid had become something far more beautiful, from her maid to myself. Now, when I wake in the mornings, I put on my uniform not as a costume, but as a reflection of my choice. I still work at the hotel, still move with quiet care, still find meaning in small things: the scent of fresh linens, the sound of polished glass, the gentle thank yous from strangers. Clara and I still share our life, but our love feels different now, anchored, equal, and full of respect for the paths we both had to walk. Sometimes she watches me as I prepare breakfast and smiles the same soft smile she gave me the first day she said, "Perfect." Only now, it's not pride or control in her eyes, it's love. Real, unshakable love born from transformation, acceptance, and truth. And sometimes, late at night, when I look at the framed letter from my mother, I whisper to myself, this is who I was meant to be. The journey never truly ends. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of where it leads. The following months brought a peace I hadn't felt in years, but peace doesn't mean stillness. It's more like a quiet river that keeps flowing, changing shape around every rock and curve. I began to notice how much I'd changed, not only in how I dressed or spoke, but in how I understood the world. I saw beauty in small things that once felt invisible to me, the way sunlight touched the clean floors of the lobby, the calm rhythm of folding linens, the quiet dignity of work done with care. It was no longer about becoming something, it was about being. Clara noticed it too. Our relationship had transformed into something rare, mutual, wordless understanding. We didn't play the same roles anymore. She didn't command, and I didn't follow. We just existed beside each other, like two reflections that had learned to mirror peace instead of pride. Some nights, she'd sit beside me as I sewed or wrote in my journal, and she'd say, "You're calmer now. You move differently. You even breathe differently." She was right. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped carrying the tension of pretending. One evening, after a long day at the hotel, I came home to find Clara standing by the window, holding something in her hands. It was an old photograph of us taken years ago, back when I still looked like the version of myself the world expected me to be. She turned it over slowly, then said, "Do you ever miss him?" I looked at the picture, the confident grin, the careless stance, and shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I think he's still here. Just quieter now." She smiled, set the photo down, and said, "Good. Because I think that's true." But life wasn't done testing me. A few months later, the hotel announced it would be hosting a high-profile event, a conference filled with important guests, including corporate executives and city officials. I was placed in charge of overseeing staff coordination. It was the biggest responsibility I'd ever been given. The pressure was enormous, and the thought of so many eyes watching filled me with quiet dread. On the first day of the event, as I walked through the grand hall, I heard someone call my old name. I froze. The voice belonged to my former boss, the one I'd worked for before Clara changed everything. He was standing near the entrance, talking to a group of executives. When he saw me, his face changed from recognition to confusion. "Is that you?" he asked, incredulous. Every instinct in me wanted to run, but I stood still. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's me." His eyes darted to my uniform, then back to my face. "What are you doing here dressed like this?" he asked, half laughing, half pitying. The old me would have stammered, explained, tried to justify. But I didn't need to. I simply said, "Working. Living." The simplicity of the answer silenced him. Throughout the rest of the event, I felt his gaze occasionally from across the room, but I stayed focused on my work, guiding guests, ensuring everything ran smoothly. At the end of the evening, when the last guest had left, my former boss approached me again, this time with less arrogance. "You seem different," he said. "Happier, maybe." I smiled faintly. "I am." He didn't respond, just nodded, as if realizing something for the first time. It was a small victory, quiet, dignified, mine. After the conference, the hotel owner called me into her office. "Lena," she said, "I've been watching you. You have a gift for this. For creating calm. For turning service into something graceful." She offered me a new role, guest relations manager. It wasn't just a promotion, it was validation. Proof that transformation, no matter how unconventional, can build something real. When I told Clara, she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "You've come so far from that day you couldn't even zip up a dress without trembling." I laughed softly. "That was a lifetime ago." She smiled. "Maybe. But that moment made this one possible." As the months rolled on, our home changed too. Clara started painting again, filling the apartment with color. I brought home flowers from the hotel every week, placing them on the kitchen table, a ritual that made her smile every morning. The photograph she once held stayed on the shelf, beside the letter from my mother and a small framed note from Evelyn that simply read, "Grace is not weakness." Those three pieces, my past, my acceptance, and my gratitude, became the quiet altar of my new life. Then, one morning, Clara surprised me. She said she had something planned. She told me to wear something nice, not my uniform. I put on a simple cream dress, the one she had chosen for me months ago but I rarely wore. When I walked into the living room, she was standing there with a small box. Inside was a pendant, silver, with the letter L engraved on it. She fastened it around my neck and said softly, "Not for Lena the maid, or Lena the student, or Lena the lesson. For Lena, the woman you became." My throat tightened. I didn't realize how much I needed that moment of affirmation, not from the world, but from her. She had seen every part of me, from resistance to surrender, confusion to clarity. And she had loved me through all of it. Later that evening, as we watched the city lights flicker from our balcony, she asked, "Do you ever wonder how different things would have been if I hadn't asked you to wear that dress?" I thought about it, the fear, the humiliation, the strange awakening that followed, and said, maybe I'd still be pretending to be someone I wasn't. Maybe I'd still think strength means never bending. She nodded, her hand finding mine. "You taught me too," she said quietly. "That love isn't about control. It's about witnessing someone's transformation without holding them back." The night was silent after that, peaceful, heavy with unspoken understanding. Years have passed since that night. I'm still Lena. Still working in hospitality. Still living a life built not on pride, but purpose. Some days, people still look twice, trying to place me, to categorize me. But I've learned that identity doesn't need to fit into words. It lives quietly, like breath. Sometimes, when I walk past the mirror, I pause, not to judge, not to question, but to remember. To remember the scared, uncertain person who once stood trembling in Clara's room, afraid to face himself. And to honor the journey that turned that fear into peace. Because in the end, that's what transformation truly is. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about peeling away everything that isn't you, until what's left feels honest. And every time I hear someone call me Lena, it no longer feels like a name borrowed from a game. It feels like home.